I look forward to the discussions about the ongoing efforts to measure social capital. I can't contribute very much there, but I do know a lot about the big debates that have been held. I'm sorry, the measurement of social performance with regard to microfinance. I look forward to hearing about. I do know a fair amount about the ongoing methodological struggle to try to measure social capital. And since I think your problem, the social performance problem, and the social capital measurement problem actually overlap by a great deal, in many respects, I think it's actually the same problem. There's always been this big problem in how do you measure the social capital of a community, because it is not inherently quantified. I remember I wrote about this in my book Trust. It was published in the mid-1990s, and I went to a conference at the World Bank where Robert Solow, the great Nobel Prize-winning economist, growth theorist, was there, and we were talking about this concept of social capital that everybody was buzzing about, and he finally, at the end of the session, said, you know, I just don't like this concept, because I know what physical capital is, I know what human capital is, I can measure it, I can put it into a model, but this social capital, it's like social, why do you even call it capital? Because it's not a homogeneous, quantity. You can't have a little bit more and a little bit less. Why don't you just call it social relations and stop thinking about it as something that's inherently measurable? And I think that he was actually onto something, because in fact the strength and the durability of the kinds of social knowledge and the social relations that underlie social capital, and therefore underlie the possibility of something like microfinance, really do have an important qualitative element that is inherently going to be difficult to measure. I mean, and it's in several respects. First of all, the solidarity in the community that's represented by social capital is, among other things, a good thing in itself. I mean, it makes people feel good if they actually have connections with their neighbors, if they can cooperate on projects. So even if it doesn't have an economic impact, I think that most people would rather live in a high trust, high social capital community than one in which everybody is at each other's throats and unable to come together for common purposes and so forth. But in any event, there is also this important qualitative respect in which some social relationships and some relationships of trust are capable of producing much greater results than others. Like, we have Facebook and Twitter, all of which are forms of social capital. Social networking is like what everybody is buzzing about right now. But my test for a strong social relationship is what I would call the nursing home test. If the person at the other end of the relationship is old and dying of some terrible disease in a nursing home, are you willing to go visit that person, every week or every day to give them support? And I suspect most people on Twitter are not going to do that with the people that they Twitter with. The relationship is somehow a little bit more superficial there. And the kinds of social results in banking and in other dimensions of development and other kinds of collective action depend on being able to assess that that qualitative dimension. The World Bank has been dealing with this in a different context in community-driven development. Community-driven development is actually quite analogous to microfinance, because what the bank and other organizations promoting this are trying to do is to work directly at a village level and to organize communities. So in this case, it's not to organize, in effect, rotating credit associations. It's actually to distribute donor resources for schools, sanitation, electrification, and so forth. But the whole concept depends entirely on the social capital of the village, which has to come together to make decisions and oftentimes to implement projects. And as in the case of microfinance, it requires a fair amount of intervention by the donors to organize the communities, because a lot of the communities are not inherently organized, or they're organized in a way that excludes important players. It doesn't include women, or it excludes the poorest members of the community, and so forth. And so it requires actually a fair amount of retail level social engineering in order to carry off. And they've been, the bank has been wrestling with the question of how to measure the effectiveness of its community-driven development programs. And the specific difficulty they have, they can actually do double-blind tests of the short-term economic impact of community-driven development. They can take treatment communities and comparable non-treatment communities and say, in 2 years or 3 years, are they better off by certain economic measures? But the social capital dimension is really, really difficult to get at. And because in a sense, these CDD projects also have a double bottom line. They're supposed to have an economic impact, but they are also supposed to add to the community stock of social capital, so that in theory, once the project shuts down and the bank is long gone, that community is going to be able to cooperate in a way that it could not cooperate prior to the donor intervention. And I'll tell you, I mean, the bank just, I think, is at a loss to measure that. They have no idea whether they've created that kind of long-term social impact. And it's inherently hard to do, and it requires this kind of long-term sort of longitudinal follow-up assessment. And unfortunately, a lot of donors just don't have the patience or the attention span to do something of that sort. So that's why I think that this task that you've set for yourself of social measurement is one that's been met in other areas as well. It's a big challenge because you are trying to quantify unquantifiable things. I think that there are a lot of questions that you need to pose. If you want to do this, of course, the most rigorously, when you're trying to measure, whatever measure of effectiveness you've chosen, whether it's a narrower economic one or in terms of one of the social outcomes that you're trying to promote. Clearly, you've got this problem of multiple causality and having to be able to control for all sorts of other factors that may impact the, so that if remittances dry up because Citigroup went bust in New York and that affects your clients, obviously you've got to be able to somehow filter that out from the inherent impact of your intervention. And obviously the state of the art in that area is doing randomized trials. That's what every development economist, microeconomist wants to do right now, but those are extraordinarily expensive, and I think it's something worth talking about whether that kind of rigor is justified in this kind of case. And then finally, the other really expensive approach to this is the longitudinal one. Longitudinal data is really valuable for any social scientist looking at virtually any phenomena, but again, it's also extremely costly to generate. So I congratulate FINCA on this. I'm looking forward to the discussion, and I think this is a really great topic, and I think the papers that have been prepared serve as a terrific foundation